Eddie, I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk to you here. You've got on February 4th, that's this Saturday, Undisputed World Super Featherweight Championship, Madison Square Gardens, Hulu Theater, New York City, live worldwide, exclusively on DAZN. You know the fighting game. You know how to talk about the fighting game, so I don't want to talk about your fight. I want to talk to you about what's going on with fighter pay in the UFC and how you see that as someone who's a promoter and you know the cutthroat business, how the fighting business, how awful it can be to the fighters. You make what of what's happening in the UFC?
I think firstly, I think the UFC is a fantastic business. I think also it provides incredible opportunity for fighters. Every young aspiring MMA fighter wants to be a part of the UFC, and that's because of the credibility that the brand has built. There are a lot of benefits through being with the UFC and signing that contract. I think what we're seeing now is the bigger issue of when a fighter becomes not bigger than the brand, but certainly to a point where they're driving significant pay-per-view, they're selling out arenas, and then they want to start to take control of their own career in terms of the revenue that they generate. And the boxing model for a long time has allowed fighters of that size, of that magnitude, to own the revenue around their fights. If you look at Anthony Joshua, if you look at Canelo Alvarez and a lot of our top fighters, ultimately they own the show. We work for them. We're really providing a service to the fighter who owns the revenue from the show. And I think you look at people like perhaps Francis Ngannou and probably Conor McGregor in the past, fighters that maybe become bigger than the UFC contract. And I think the pressure that is on them now as a business is probably going to change that contract. But for me, it really becomes when a fighter becomes a superstar through the UFC. I think they almost outgrow that initial contract.
Well, the business model, because it's not unionized, the fighters get a very low percentage of the cut, a very low percentage of the value of the company. So what's Ngannou worth when he leaves? When you're Dana White and you go 2 years, you run off your heavyweight champion because you don't want to pay him, and then you say he doesn't want to fight when that's the guy everybody wants to watch fight. What's he worth?
I think really then you have to make a decision as a business. In boxing, there are a huge number of fighters that are overpaid in terms of their commercial value. Now, we talk about the dangers of the sport. It's very difficult to say a fighter is ever overpaid, but the reality is that many are in relation to the revenue driven around their fight. As a business in the UFC, when you have a decision to make like Francis Ngannou, you almost have to break down the barriers of what you're doing, which is that central contract. It's a dangerous move because you start opening the door to restructuring it for stars. And I think over time, it's probably something they're going to have to do. If you're Francis Ngannou, who has very cleverly kind of, found his way to become a free agent, he's now in a fantastic position. He sits there with an opportunity to move into the boxing world, really controlling his own destiny, doing his own deals, not having to tie himself necessarily to a promotional company, to a broadcaster. He can sit independently, almost field offers from different promoters around different fights, and he's going to make a lot of money.
Okay, but what's he worth? You know these things. You know these things.
The answer, what's he worth, is what's someone prepared to pay? That's the better question. And I think that when you look around the likes of an Anthony Joshua fight, which is something that we could obviously look at with him, a Tyson Fury fight. I mean, they're the two big fights for him in boxing. And they're going to generate him considerably more money than he could have made, probably subject to, what I've heard, probably the same as you, the numbers that were offered him through his UFC contract. So honestly, the number, I don't know. Depends what the site fee is, depends what the pay-per-view revenue is. But certainly he will be in a position now to see that in black and white and make sure that the revenue received for the show goes to Francis Ngannou.
The number that's been reported is 3 fights, 1 Stipe, 2 John Jones, $8 million. That's underpaid for what those fights would be. He wanted his freedom. He refused to fight those fights. What's that worth?
What's what worth? Those fights?
Those 3 fights, Ngannou, what are those worth if you had to pay fair market value for those fights?
Well, I mean, Dan, it all depends on the revenue through the pay-per-view of a UFC deal. I don't know. I'm telling you, if you're going to sell out an arena for that fight, you're going to be selling out at around probably a $5 to $8 million gate. you're going to be generating, I don't know, 300,000-400,000 pay-per-view buys at $69 a pop, split with a broadcaster. There's the international sponsorship. UFC is not my game. I know the boxing game like the back of my hand. I could tell you what a fight generates. And I know that a fight with Anthony Joshua against Francis Ngannou would generate well in excess of 1.5 million pay-per-view buys in the UK, would probably generate 500,000 plus pay-per-view buys in the US. Would it come with a huge site fee? Probably from the Middle East as well. And I will sit down with Anthony Joshua after his fight on April 1st and see if he wants to fight Francis Ngannou, because Anthony's mindset is to become world heavyweight champion again. So it's a big sort of diversion in the road, but also it's a fight he believes he would win, obviously, and also would generate a significant amount of money. So it's not something that I've sat down with Anthony and looked at. But, in terms of what fights generate, it's not difficult to work that out, in all honesty. But what your point earlier, Dan, was fact. The margins are different. When you're talking about revenue versus fighter pay, perhaps in the UFC, that model is closer to 70-30 or 80-20. It's skewed to UFC. Boxing's actually the reverse, right? So the fighters would normally generate and take home the 80% of the revenue pot, where the promoters would get 20%. So obviously in many ways, I'm envious of the UFC model.
Yeah,
it's
a great business model if you can abuse the young guys because they're not worth very much, pay them very little, and build stars that you don't then fight because they're too big for your brand and they want too many freedoms. But Ngannou, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, those things will probably happen and be giant fights, right? I saw that Tyson Fury wants to fight Ngannou probably because he wants to take him from Anthony Joshua.
Yeah. Well, like I say, there's only 2 fights for Ngannou that generate that kind of money, and that's Tyson Fury and that's Anthony Joshua. Maybe Deontay Wilder, but not of the same level as the first 2. So it looks like Tyson Fury will fight Usyk maybe in April or May. AJ will fight April the 1st, and like I said, for AJ, he's not looking at a Francis Ngannou fight. He's looking at trying to become world heavyweight champion again, but it's not to say that we wouldn't be interested in discussing that fight because, like I said, it's going to generate a lot of money.
If I say to you, fighters in the game worth the most right now, mixed martial arts and boxing, how many names are you saying before you say Jake Paul?
Boxing, I'm saying Canelo Alvarez, Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury. Gervonta Davis. And then, I think that sometimes the money and the numbers reported on fighter pay is not quite correct, and it's certainly overinflated. But Jake Paul's doing great things for boxing. He's driving numbers, and I remove him now from the world of YouTube. I honestly do. You've got YouTube boxing, which is really an entertainment format, and then you've got Jake Paul. And Jake Paul isn't, for me, really YouTube boxing. I feel like he's doing training camps. Now he's fighting a real fighter, not a very good one, but still an undefeated professional fighter. So I feel like you have to give him his respect. He's driving numbers, he's driving interest, and I think he's doing a good job.
Eddie, on top of your boxing promotions, you are the chairman of the Professional Darts Corporation. What's a more entertaining event to attend, a prize fight or a classic darts match?
Well, I've got to say, the darts business is incredible. We're seeing in the UK and around the world, darts is outperforming the rating numbers from boxing by 2 and sometimes 3 to 1. We joked with Ariel Helwani recently. He became a lover of darts during the World Championship. We actually have a US darts event at Madison Square Garden in June. We did it last June. This will blow your mind. Go onto YouTube, search 9 dart finishes through the PDC, which is a Professional Darts Corporation, which is our business. This will blow your mind. The atmosphere is incredible. They are working class heroes that are making millions of dollars to play darts every week around the world as part of a global schedule. It is unbelievable. But for me,
look how happy he is. You're happier there. I've asked you 9 minutes of business and finance questions.
You know why, Dan? Because people say thank you, right? And it's like you go into a sporting world where everyone's smiling, right? Everyone can't believe it. This guy used to work on a building site. 2 years later, he's throwing darts around the world, making $5 million, right? And then you go into boxing and you're dealing with, lawyers, managers, like crooks, like whatever, I don't know, like, and it's like, boxing is the most beautiful sport, but the worst business.
Wait a minute, you're one of the managers. You're.
No, I'm not. I'm a promoter. We've got a business that spans 40 years. We like to work on a word called integrity, which is a word that is virtually invisible in the fight game.
Okay,
you know?
Explain. I don't know. You have so many good stories, but can you explain to Amin Al-Hassan, a front office guy, that your best, God almighty, this is a dirty business story. God almighty, boxing is the sewer for business. I hate that I make my living in this cesspool filled with rats, leeches, and con men.
I think the best way to describe it is there is no barriers to enter in terms of the boxing business, right? So this afternoon, you two sitting there in your studio could go, do you know what? Let's become boxing managers, right? Next thing, you're in my office, and you're telling me that this fighter's worth $20 million a fight. I've seen his pay-per-view numbers. I've seen the numbers that he generates at the gate. But you two are sitting there with no knowledge of the numbers, telling me. And next thing, we're rolling around on the floor. I've whacked Dan. You've jumped me from behind. It's a real mess. That won't happen. But you understand what I'm saying? Fighters get advised, literally, by people
right.
who they've bumped into in Chick-fil-A. Right, and you get to people even at the level of like Spence v. Crawford, right? I'm worth this. Why? You've never done a pay-per-view that's generated more than X. No, but this fight, I'm telling you now, this fight will do 1 million buys. Really? Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, you can own the pay-per-view. Oh, no, I don't want to own the pay-per-view. I want a guarantee. No, but you just told me it'll do 1 million buys. Oh, well, yeah. So like, this is the problem. I mean, on one hand, the structure of the UFC contract, I know there's a lot of debate in that world about what's right and what's fair and what's not, but at least the structure has a structure. In boxing, you're renegotiating every fight. It's minimum purses. It's opponents to be mutually agreed. I sit there, I'm so envious of Dana White. Sometimes he sits there and goes, morning, you are fighting you, and I'll see you at the weekend. Bye.
Yes.
That's it.
It is an unfair structure, but you're happy that at least it has a structure.
I'm happy. I'd be happy to be able to say that. And it's one of the problems with boxing. And one of the beauties of UFC is you do see the best fight the best because you're told who you're fighting.
That's
you
correct.
sign up to an agreement. You don't forget as well, Dan, you sign up to an agreement that enables you to be under that instruction to fight who you want. I would love to sit there in boxing and say, imagine how great the sport would be if you did sign, a universal contract that basically enabled the money is set and you have to fight whoever's put in front of you, right? So you get to a stage where Terence Crawford says, right, you're fighting Errol Spence. Okay, done. Gervonta Davis, you're fighting Ryan Garcia. Great. Tyson Fury, you're fighting Deontay Wilder. Wow, we'd have that every week. But unfortunately, we gave up, and definitely rightfully so, we gave up that ability a long time ago. And now I have no problem in saying, which a lot of old school promoters do have a problem saying, every fighter that I represent is my boss, right? I work for the fighter. And notoriously, that's never how it's been. The fighter works for the promoter. That went years ago. And we started giving the fighters ownership of the revenue, which is fair because they're the entertainers. If you're a singer, if you're a rock band and you're going out and you're filling stadiums, right? They're all there to watch you. You can't have the music manager taking 80% of the pot of the revenue. They are the stars, and especially in a sport which is very dangerous. They need to make sure that they, and as a business, we're fine with that split in revenue. We do very well, thank you. We don't need 80% of the revenue. But that's how you get longevity and relationships with clients. People like Anthony Joshua, people like Canelo Alvarez, they know when they work with us, they see everything. And they love that model.
I just can't believe that you've been in the boxing game this long. And when you talk about the business of boxing, you're interested and curious, and you kind of love it and kind of hate it. But when he asks you about darts, you're saying that's the most pure of joys. That in sport, it's not two men barbarically beating each up in a ring. It's darts is where you will find me smiling and pure.
But Dan, isn't sport, right? Sport is supposed to put a smile on your face. When you start playing any sport, that feeling that it gives you, it has to be about the glory. And the problem with professional sport is as you get deeper, it becomes more about the politics and more about the money, which is fine. That's business. But what I'm saying is darts, although these guys are making a lot of money, it's still the purity of victory. You know, it's still the moment of legacy. And that's, as a sports fan, that's what we live for every day. And it just becomes frustrating where money and politics stand in the way of legacy and achievement. And that's why darts puts a smile on my face, because these guys are out there achieving, wanting to win championships, and they're very happy with what they're being paid, which is fantastic for them. And boxing, unfortunately, sometimes the glory in boxing, there's nothing like it. You know, I went to the other night, the New York Knicks against the Lakers, right? Went out there. I thought back to Amanda Serrano against Katie Taylor at Madison Square Garden. The atmosphere for that fight was 100 times better than the Knicks versus the Lakers, right? That's why boxing can be the greatest spectacle in the world. But
Knicks.
my God, it frustrates the life out of me.
It's the Knicks, Amin says.
If you love the darts, stand up. If you love the darts, stand up.
Yes.
If you love the darts, stand up.
I don't understand.
Guys,
What?
you are coming to Madison Square Garden.
Hell
in
yeah, I'm
June
there.
To watch the darts. All on me. You will have the best night of your life.
Eddie, I've been twice to the World Darts Championship at the Alley Pally. I can wholeheartedly 100% endorse everything you said about the darts. I'm glad the Michael Van Gerwen, Michael Smith 9 dart dueling legs went viral, because this is a sport that America can get behind. It is me drinking straight from a pitcher for 3 straight hours.
Okay,
it is
no
the
one
most
wants
fun
you.
that I've
No
ever
one
been
wants
to
to
a
hear
sporting
you
event.
bragging about your dart bona fides. The man. Are you not seeing how many people are in this room that you're saying all on me, Madison Square Garden?
No, it's just the
going.
two Chris's.
No,
just us two.
no,
Yeah.
we're
No,
all
I'm
going.
going.
No,
I'm going.
No, it's just the two.
It's
We're the
a
only ones who stood up.
Love
I'll take a free
MSG.
trip.
We
Yeah,
like
sure.
darts.
Just stood up.
Let's
I
go.
love darts.
Yeah.
I'm a dartsman.
All expenses paid.
I just saw Billy come in on his day off. He just ran into the studio. Eddie, thank you for being on with us, sir.
No worries, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Eddie.